Hi, everybody. Uh, Welcome to NAB 2024, first day. This session is called Drive for Corporate Profitability, or we're going to talk about total cost of ownership. I think it's important to focus on this because especially, when you're at a trade show, and I guess I should say, as per the slate over there, I'm Joe Zaller. I'm from Devoncroft. We're a market analyst company. We focused on the media tech space for 15 years. We measure trends and sizing in the industry. Grant is from the NHL. Tom is from Roku, and Gordon is from Zixi. So I think it's important that we focus on the actual business of the business here. You come to a trade show, there's lots of buzzwords, there's lots of things that you hear over time, and we're at an inflection point where this stuff has to make money. There has to be a return on it. We have to focus on it. In terms of, I think that this year, at NAB, and as somebody who's, had a business where we've measured trends in the industry the past 15 years and published an index on that. 15 years ago, the thing that was most important was going HD. I don't know if anybody here has gone HD recently, but you can't not go. And so, really this is about, we've seen over the past few years as new technologies have come along, plus a lot of corporate actions that have happened, with mergers, with sports rights, with, all sorts of things, that there's been a lot of consolidation. There's been a lot of building. There's been a lot of international expansion. We've gone through COVID. It's a really dynamic business environment. And I feel like we've come to the point where there's been a lot of investment, a lot of building, and we're at this kind of point where the foundation has been built, that we can do new things on top of it, and we've got to get the economics right. We're at in kind of a crossroads here, or between things like REMI, remote production, depending on where you're from, cloud, IP, connectivity, distribution, all coming together, and we want to talk about the intersection of those kind of trends or mega trends that are going to define the way this industry moves forward. So I think I'd like to start with you two. Just since we're talking about the cost, what are your biggest costs today versus what they were 2-3 years ago?
Certainly IP connectivity and cloud our cloud bill has gone through the roof. But generally I view that as a good problem to have, because it means that we've been successful in transitioning a bunch of our kind of more traditional broadcast distribution models to a new model where people are really embracing taking linear signals from the cloud. I think that I was kind of just talking before we kind of got started and saying that, one of the best things that happened in the last 24 months is really traditional linear providers started to embrace receiving signals primarily from a cloud-based environment, rather than requiring you to drop a decoder in their facility and give them a satellite address or coordinates. And, the idea that all of these providers kind of came to the same point in the same kind of short period of time has really been gratifying, right?
No more shipping of IRDs would be lovely.
100%. I mean, certainly building something new is great when it kind of starts to actually get enough volume that it starts to let you shut the old stuff down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, speaking of old stuff and new stuff, I mean, so the Roku channel started as more of an on-demand video platform. Obviously we launched fast in 2018 or so. So linear has always been an important component. But I think to answer your question directly, look back at really where some of these new cost centers are coming into place, the growth of live events and everything else. And we're, there's so much more to come. But when we look at that, and my cost pipeline is more on the ingestion, transcoding, packaging, server-side ad insertion, and ultimately CDN built out to the end consumer. But when I look at the world of our live business compared to the world of our VOD business, both are doing very well and growing, but it's really that live piece, particularly anything that's variable in that cost pipeline. That's where we're seeing things just really, really skyrocket. And that's where we're focusing a lot of our attention these days.
Is there some, I mean, we also, in addition to all the other things that happened, the C-band spectrum was repatched. And is that the driver for the satellite cost of, or the reason why everybody kind of came to the realization that let's move to IP? It's more efficient.
I'm not sure that that's why we really took that path. I think really it got down to the point where you're starting to need to feed all of these alternate workflows, whether they be, traditional broadcast ones or digital ones. And really being able to feed all of those workflows, with one transmission was kind of the key point, because we don't want to necessarily duplicate encode and hardware in the field. When you've got 32 venues with a lot of encode sitting in them, you don't necessarily want to have to stack more on it, just to support alternate distributions, right? And so really being able to squeeze that footprint down so that we're sending one transmission into the cloud that's fulfilling all of our digital and linear businesses, is a huge, it's a huge benefit for us. But it also helps us to basically hone in on the content and the workflows and getting those right, rather than kind of having multiple different kind of arenas where you've got to go and adjust things to deal with problems.
Tom, I guess you're one of those endpoints that Grant has to service, right? So from your perspective.
Well, I think what I think is really interesting about it is the level of sophistication with some of these sports leagues and sort of what they're emitting for these different distribution outlets and the way that they're able to leverage and rinse and repeat, whether it's, we're a much more of a technology, company. And so we want to receive something that's relatively well published and is ready to sort of as directly and as quickly as possible get to that end consumer. And I think that's a really big piece of what's going on in terms of sort of the overlays and everything else within the content.
Yeah, I mean, how much more complicated is a workflow that involves basically a satellite decode to baseband, a re-encode of some kind, and then a retransmission to a potentially another environment to do your bulk kind of laddered encodes for your end users and things like that. You end up with a scenario where it's a lot easier to actually visualize what the right workflow is when you're starting out with just a single feed that you're working with, and you're not having to go and transform that along the way.
And also it gives you the flex. I mean, it's a big focus for a lot of businesses is internationalization of content, right? It starts to give you more, if you start to break that down into the components, you've got your video, you've got your digital overlays for scoreboards and things, but then also the audio tracks and everything else. I mean, that it just gives you, as a content owner or sports league, more flexibility to send it out. And that gives me as a digital distribution outlet more options to pick it out and put it to the user.
Yeah. I mean, clearly, like we've gone to the point where we're, I've got 5 different kind of renditions of each broadcast, for every game. So it's not just a single linear feed anymore. It's multiple linear feeds that are feeding different regions and things like that. And it's, like just the ability to basically orchestrate that all in the cloud rather than having to go and say, I'm going to have an international satellite partner that's going to have daily communications with 50 cable head ends in Europe. Rather than do it that way, I have a single encode that's going into the cloud, and I'm feeding all of these mouths, so to speak, with different feeds that would have been cost prohibitive to put. It would be cost prohibitive to put 5 feeds of every game on a satellite.
And then on my end, right, picking that up, with where we sit and the way that our service has sort of naturally evolved, I don't want to staff up an entire master control room of people to sit there and listen to somebody on the phone telling me and counting me down to an ad marker. We're very proudly ad supported at Roku. We don't want to sit there and ask somebody to listen to somebody on the phone to do that. I want to just push that upstream to the content creator, the sports league, whatever, and have them hit the big red button and tell me it's time for that ad to go, and have my system automatically hook into that, detect that, and then ultimately insert the ads as they're flowing through. But I assume from your perspective, you have to think about that, respect that, and support that, while also worrying about subscription services and everything else, right?
Yeah. I mean, certainly you have to take the same feed and you have to deliver a version that's, let's say, slated for watch and bet. So that there are no ads. But you take those same Scuddy triggers and send a feed that is not slated, so that folks like Roku downstream can go and replace the ads.
So it's interesting to see you as the league, the content owner, and Tom as the endpoint, sitting in between you, figuratively though not literally right now, Gordon, from your position at Dixie, you are helping the what's happening in between. When you look at this from the cost savings perspective, maybe with these, with companies like these or others, where are you seeing that the costs that have been there, and then the cost coming down, and the focus on total cost of ownership?
Yeah. So, we have 1,400 customers, and, these guys, we're proud to say, are our customers. And, but it's very interesting to watch, and everybody has to do more with less. And everybody, and the workflows are changing, and how you're monetizing is changing, and you need to do more monetizing. So it's that ultimate flexibility is, I think, one of the keys to reducing TCO. And, satellite's great for a lot of things, but, typically we'll be, an IP-based, contribution distribution would be typically 50 to 75% more cost effective, and give you that ultimate in terms of, flexibility. But that big part of what we do is try and make the cost of running, the solutions as cost effective as possible, operating them, implementing them. So what we do with our control plane and Zen Master is just a key element to being able to manage. The NHL has 1,000 targets, right? Or sources, right? Targets.
1,000 targets, 1,000. So actually,
Yeah.
I probably have 1,000 sources and more than 1,000 targets.
Yeah. So just being able to do that is a big part of making this cost effective.
Right. And that feeds into the internationalization, right? Because you would have, even if you wanted to do 5 different international feeds, you have to provision five satellite feeds. Now the example we always use with you is like, you're a very international business. Somebody wants to follow the player from Finland. Used to have to, it would be impossible to do that. Now presumably you just send them an IP address and they can tune into that.
Yeah. It's great, really, from my perspective, because certainly want to give the fans everything that they can possibly want from us. And really it's about understanding that there are hockey fans everywhere, and we have to do as diligent a job as we can to find them. And, to the extent that, being able to go and generate revenue from various international regions separately, by producing all these additional renditions, it just really would not be an economic possibility to do that in a satellite driven linear world.
What I find fascinating, and I don't think most people know, is how dynamic it is, and what little notice sometimes NHL gets for somebody who's going to take a game. It's literally sometimes half hour before the game, right?
Yeah, certainly that agility is a welcome side benefit of all of this, is that, if you need a feed from me and you have a Zixi broadcaster in your facility, I can throw you a URL and you can be getting a feed from me 5 minutes later.
I'd also add, on top of the agility, though, it's also the resiliency and the redundancy of it. That's a huge thing. And that is a cost area, right? And being concerned about what's sitting upstream of you and knowing that it's going to be solid and working. And then also just the responsiveness layer, right? It's more than just being being nice to work with you. It's also knowing that if there's a problem, there's somebody there. And then also just the knowing that signal is going to be up. And if for whatever something happens, that you're going to quickly fail over, that's extremely valuable. And ultimately it allows us to squeeze out different cost centers downstream.
And there's a benefit to working in live, because live has to be perfect. And that's just the way you have to do it. And it's, your technology has to be that way. And your support teams and your engineering teams have to be exactly that way too, because it's all about, zero downtime and making it perfect and making it easy as possible.
Yeah. And Tom, it was interesting with the live, because you're relatively new to that. You said it was mainly Vaughn. You just did the Super Bowl. You're doing other stuff in Formula E.
We like to do big, bold things. No, yeah. I mean, our live business has been around. We launched the Roku channel in 2017 as an on-demand only service. We launched fast in 2018 or so, and then started getting premium subscriptions launched in 2019, and that came with the stars and other sort of channels. This was one of the areas that we work with Zixi, is getting those cable channels and delivering those directly. But yeah, it's the live events. We launched Formula E this year. That's sort of our first direct to sports league, and I think it's an exciting opportunity for them to go directly to a consumer through a semi-exclusive distribution option in the U.S. But it's been a great experience thus far, but we're just getting started.
Right. What about latency? That's super important to you, Grant, right? And
oh yeah.
And to be honest, I have not been able to really routinely get anything that's going to continuously beat 60 latency wise into the cloud.
I would generally agree with that. I think latency happens at basically every step you take, every hop that happens is going to create latency. And so it's really about having a, end to end. And unfortunately for you, you don't always control that end to end, right? And that's, but Roku is very fortunate because we own the device. And then we're able to go all the way up in the case of the Super Bowl, CBS, Paramount Plus, where they were able to make a very raw output available to us. And we were able to really control our destiny essentially end to end. Which gave us a lot of power, and we focused a lot on our low latency. We're very, very happy with the results of it, but it's a big area of focus. It's very important to consumers, particularly with live sports.
I just saw a chart, like a half an hour ago, and it was a Super Bowl, and it was latency by delivery platform, and Roku was one of the lowest latencies.
Well, that's good to hear.
But you're talking about latency on kind of different ends. You're, coming in, the close to real time, but when you're talking about the cost of ownership, the TCO, part of that is like there are some areas where the time is really valuable. You really have to pay for it, and other times you could wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, I would say, watch and bet's a perfect example, right? Essentially you have to be able to beat the latency of somebody sitting in the stands with an iPhone, typing furiously on some app, basically trying to upload, data faster than you're uploading it. So I said, another couple of times this week that, readjusting the difference between the latency of our data and the latency of the video coming out of the venue is a super important thing for us, because the data has been getting faster and faster and faster, and it's essentially letting the proverbial cat out of the bag, to the fans before they actually see it with their own eyes.
One of the things we're doing here with the NHL at the show, with Verizon and with the AWS, is we're doing we're doing 2 live games. It'll be broadcast at the Verizon booth, and it's completely in the cloud, Remy, using 5G and transcoding at the edge in the wavelength zone. So getting to super, super low latency, and talk about cost savings too, because, Grant can talk better about this, but not having to pull, trucks up to all these events and things like that. So, very interesting stuff.
Well, it gives you, to go back to the resiliency thing, It gives you a lot more resiliency choices at the venue, right? Because I can make different networking choices in a realm where I'm pushing IP to the cloud than when I was pushing to a dedicated provider over a piece of leased fiber.
With the fragmentation of content, of viewership, explosion of content, we also have, in your case, this kind of layer of uncertainty around one, RSNs, and two, there's a whole demo of 50, 60 million people who have never subscribed to an RSN. Just sticking with the latency, your ability to get stuff to the edge and process it there means that you can produce this in the cloud. And what's the benefit of that, and how do you quantify the value?
Yeah, so the cloud production stuff for us really is it was a risk mitigation exercise with regard to RSNs potentially failing or going out of business or refusing to broadcast teams' games or whatever, or and being able to have an answer for that question is a super important one. Obviously, there's not really a cost of ownership on that one, but there would be a cost of ownership if it goes the wrong direction, right? And really being able to drive down that source latency coming from the venue is the most important thing to making a cloud broadcast work.
And just one other thing, nobody's ever done this before. So what we're doing is we're taking the content from the arenas, we're taking it into the cloud and using 60, and then we're taking it to the wavelength zone, and then we're transcoding it to NDI in the wavelength zone and doing the production work in the wavelength zone, and then transcoding it back into transport stream and into the HLS to go to the consumer.
Well, so, and then the ability for me later on to provide those feeds back to the fans in the arena now is incredibly enhanced because I can deliver those feeds back from the availability zone directly to the arena over, a hyper-fast Verizon 5G network. And I can guarantee that my fans are seeing, replays within, let's say, a second of something happening on the ice rather than, 10 seconds later, which is what you would normally see with an HLS stream.
I would imagine also it gives you an opportunity to create lots of different variations and flavors of content mashed up in different ways, and making, that sort of hardcore fan base also just have so many more options than they would have had even a few years ago.
100%.
Tom, for all of those individual personalized things that Grant can do, is that something that you can imagine providing to the people who have your devices or that are subscribers to your channels?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're still in the early days of how this is all going to manifest itself, but it's absolutely something that we've been talking about, in our case with the Formula E, right? They've got all these different driver camera footage, right? There's so much content being created. And I think, Roku very much prides itself on the simplicity of the interface, really making sure it's just easy to navigate. And I think that's the piece of that. But we've got fantastic folks on our UX and product side that are actively working on these things. That how can we get this in front of the users and make it easy to jump between these things? Obviously keeping the costs, everything else in line. I think it's just a matter of time.
I would say, I think that the TCO talk we're going to be having a year from now is more along the lines of what's the cost that you're receiving for not having your feeds in the cloud and not being able to leverage the cloud to produce new content opportunities and new opportunities to monetize that content.
That's a great point too. We talk about TCO a lot, but what's the opportunity cost, right? That's just got to be part of that same equation.
Well, and I think also, whether you're a subscription service, an ad-supported service, whatever, it's also up to the users to sort of vote with their eyeballs, vote with their clicks, right? I think services are, continuing to, I think it was a fantastic experience I was seeing for the Masters, right? In terms of going to jump around all these different holes and everything else, but, that's a lot of work for every distribution outlet to go and build out. Of course, and then what could be done that could be used generically across lots of different services, no matter what the sport is or whatever your area of focus is. But ultimately, it's only going to make sense to move up on those product roadmaps if users are watching it, consuming the content in those ways. And I think that's that dynamic that's at play and unfolding in real time.
So since you talked about the TCO analysis in the future, and you also, kind of like, oh, we can produce things in a different way. We've got a few minutes left, and I'd like each of you to spend 2 of those minutes just doing a little predicting of where this can go in the future and how that's going to help you either generate more revenue, monetize more, save cost on the way that you've currently done it, which is going to lead to your TCO ROI.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say really the hugest area that we see for benefits down the road is the knock-on effects of having all of these feeds in the cloud at low latency and being able to say, hey, I'm going to build a brand new highlights operation that's entirely in the cloud. And I'm going to be able to deliver much better highlight packages than I would in the past. It's huge, potentially a huge benefit. I think we have 5 different clipping tools floating around the league for various workflows. And really being able to collapse that highlights operation is a cost savings from potentially a production personnel, perspective, which is not something to focus on because generally speaking, that actually never pans out. It just means that we produce more content.
Right. And service providers too, presumably a part of that.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being able to easily provide a new potential provider with feeds of yours so that you can actually A/B test things and really push the envelope all season long rather than just being able to do it in the off season when nothing, you're not breaking anything, is liberating.
I mean, I think building on top of that, I definitely go back to a little bit what I mentioned earlier. I think just putting the tools in front of the content subject matter experts and giving them the ability to mark these things rather than having to build out 2, 3, 4 groups of people that are essentially all doing the same thing across multiple different companies is it's from an industry perspective, it's going to be a huge cost saver. And then I think coming out of that, we're also seeing it. We're right on the forefront of this in terms of just these sports distribution deals are all changing, getting much more creative. The number of very high quality fast channels that are coming out with true live games. I mean, that we're still on the early days of that really playing out. I mean, across, and it's not just sports, but makes sense for this panel, but the ability to insert live content into what was essentially traditionally a bunch of on-demand assets, right? So I think that there's, when we start to save the cost of these other places, we're going to be able to drive that into different areas and different options. And I think it's just going to explode the number of viewing options that are available for users, particularly the hardcore fans.
Last word to you, Gordon.
So if I was thinking about predictions, right? And you look at what Grant's doing with this cloud production and delivery from the edge, the wavelength zone in AWS's case, you can multicast on 5G. And it's just a matter of the provider giving you that capability. So we're having those conversations with Verizon and in Europe and Germany and other places where some are already doing that. But when you think about being able to get your content to the edge, super low latency, and be able to multicast for certain applications, that takes the CDN out of play and then takes the latency from 10 or 12 seconds or whatever it is down into potentially milliseconds. I think it's a big game changer, and I think that's coming over the next, 3 or 4 years.
Save cost, better experience.
You got it.
Yeah. Okay. That's, we are out of time. That went
Thank
quick.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.